Dámy a páni, opäť príjemné popoludne vám všetkým, ktorí ste prišli do sály číslo 2, ktorá nesie podtitul Climatech. Naša civilizácia pomerne je rozvinutá, ale dlho nám trvalo, kým sme si uvedomili aj také tie následky tých technologických pokrokov, ku ktorým spejeme. A technologický pokrok ako taký si naozaj ruka v ruke vyžiadal aj zvýšiť povedomie o klimatických zmenách a zároveň podnietil aj medzinárodné debaty a následné dohody k znižovaniu priateľných riešení práve s ohľadom na tie budúce generácie. Otázkou je, či sú tieto riešenia priateľné alebo postačujúce. Naopak, napredujeme síce rýchlo, ale nestíhame sa adaptovať na úplne všetky výzvy. Klimatické zmeny totiž, vyčerpateľnosť fosílnych palív a snaha o udržateľný rozvoj by mali pre nás všetkých byť motiváciou. Pohľad na to, čo sme na tejto ceste k zelenej transformácii za celý ten čas od uvedomenia si dokázali, nám povie uznávaný odborník a myšlienkový líder v oblasti energetiky Thomas Mikkelsen, ktorý otvára druhú časť SlovakiaTech Forum Expo. Stage is yours.
Thank you. So thanks a lot for welcoming me here in Slovakia to SlovakiaTech. I am Thomas Mikkelsen and I will be presenting to you a few case stories based on the experience that I've had from 25 years in the energy industry, focusing basically on everything that has happened in a Nordic context in relation to focusing on how can we make the green energy transition a success, how can we focus on sustainability and growth at the same time, and what role does technology play in all that. So I've brought to you today 3 case stories that I'd like to dig a little bit into, and then hopefully we'll have time also for a few questions afterwards. So I won't spend a lot of time on who we are. The company is called Smart Innovation Norway. It's basically a research NGO, non-profit company based in Halden in Norway, but also with offices in Helsinki and in Copenhagen. So it is really a Nordic entity. We have different areas of expertise around these focus points. And the thing is that we are trying to combine technology and what we call the applied part of it. So basically behavioral science, social innovation is also sometimes what we call it. So what I'll bring to you here is actually a little bit from every perspective. So as I promised, I'll be digging into a few cases. But first of all, I'll start out about some fun facts, just to put things a little bit in perspective. So the thing is that when we are looking at the differences between the Nordic countries and Slovakia, I mean, there has been quite a lot going on over the past 25 years. It means basically that where we are at in the Nordic context right now, we can say that we have actually succeeded in creating an opportunity where we are able to support some kind of growth together with still dealing with the energy transition and lowering the amount of CO2 emissions and climate gases overall. So it's super important to kind of bear that in mind when I'm continuing my presentation. And as I said, I will be digging into 3 areas, and they are complex and they are also very different. So please, let's start here. Let's start maybe actually looking into administrative measures. What is it from a Nordic context that has been delivered in order to achieve what has been achieved? And again, I'm not saying that everything is perfect in the Nordic countries because it's far from that. But there's been at least some measures that, again, in comparison, can look as if they are a bit more strong, they're a bit bigger. If we again compare here to Slovakia, it's clear that part of the reason in relation to why there might be a slight advantage when we're looking to the Nordic countries in order to actually meet the targets and the goals of net zero emission is partly because that there's been formulated some quite ambitious goals quite early on. And unless we realize, and we've done quite a lot of research on this, unless we realize that we need to have basically a common mindset focusing on what is it that we want to achieve, is very hard. You can have a lot of technology, you can have a lot of opportunities, you can have a lot of great companies and great minds, but if we do not know together what it is that we want to achieve and why we want to do that, then it's very hard to accomplish it, because then people will not start working together. There's no like common agreement on which direction we are going. So that's one very important part, I'd say, in relation to the administrative measures. When we then dig a little more into what does that actually mean, again, I try to compare what are the overall areas that are in legislation in Slovakia and in the Nordic countries. And it's clear that, I mean, there are great ambitions both places, but the thing is that what I see when I try to do the comparison here is that there are probably a lot of different sectors, ambitions, and different ways of looking into the problem. It's not simply a matter of only focusing on one specific thing that could hopefully reduce. We need basically to look into a lot of different areas and see how they work together, and that when they work together, they'll probably accomplish more than if we were just focusing on one place. So I think one super important thing to take away from the kind of Nordic experience is this fact that, yes, there is actually a need for looking into legislative measures on many different levels, on many different aspects of life. It can be in relation to buildings, it can be in relation to taxes, it can be in relation to hydrogen production. And no, they're not necessarily connected per se, but they work together, and that's kind of the idea and what we're looking into. So the number one thing here, it seems as if when we are doing this comparison that there's been a more diverse kind of strategy towards looking at what kind of measures, what kind of legislation is it that we need to install and work with in order to meet the ambitious targets. So the conclusion for this first number one is that we need to address a complex problem at many different levels, also from a legislative perspective. Then let's take an example that is maybe a bit more focused, but still related, and that's the thing here. Let's look at a technological measure. Let's look at the introduction of electrical vehicles in a Nordic context. So what is interesting here, again, in relation to what I just said, is that the introduction, the case of EVs in a Nordic context, did not come about just with one simple measure. No, there needed to be quite a lot of different things working together, because there are many people that cannot see themselves necessarily change their fossil fuel car to an EV, and there could be many good reasons for that. So we need basically to address a lot of those concerns alongside what it is that we want to do. And I try to sum up some of it here, and what is interesting is also that a lot of it is actually related to non-financial incentives. So just some simple measures, giving special rights for parking, for driving, for having a specific focus on where do we put the charging stations, ensuring that there are basically a law that is giving the right for every consumer to install the EV charger, so it's not becoming a problem that you cannot charge your car. So it's again trying to look at it from a more holistic perspective, and I think this is very much how it came about that Norway today is the country with I saw this year actually the number of EVs have surpassed the number of fossil-driven cars. So quite interesting that over the course of actually not that long a time, it has been a clear understanding, and it's basically more common sense now to drive an EV in a country actually with quite far distances as Norway, and you would not necessarily think that it would be the #1 country to begin with when you look at the infrastructure. So summing up here, having ambitious targets, it's related to what I said before also when looking at the administrative measures. Then also saying from the governmental side, okay, we will actually be part of this. We will invest in EVs, show that it can work. So there's actually been kind of a mandatory to go in, and that when you buy a new car, it needs to be an EV. So along a lot of different measures, it's true. And then, of course, there's the whole industry support, which is also important, that you realize that there are many different actors that need to play together, and they need to make a living also in, if not short term, at least medium term. Otherwise, they'll not be able to survive. So a lot of different measures is basically the reason for EV's success. It's not only about designing and having a car that measured on all parameters are better than a fossil car, because they are different. They have different pros and cons. But if we are creating a story around it, if we are ensuring that actually all the concerns that people are having are addressed one way or another, this is where the change comes. So that leads me then to another example, which I find quite interesting, and it's related to what I call societal measures. What do I mean by that? I mean that sometimes a technology can be seen as an intrusive measure, and what I'm talking about here is actually the case of smart meters. We made a very, very small vox pop in understanding the understanding of what is a smart meter here in Slovakia, and it turns out not everybody knows what is a smart meter. So I'll just very briefly tell you, even though probably everybody here knows. The fact is that when you have an electricity consumption, you have a meter, and if it's a smart meter, the definition is basically it's digital and it can be read remotely. Those two components are basically what is creating a smart meter. It's not saying much more than that, but it creates a fantastic opportunity for having very different solutions. What we've seen is that flexibility in relation to using electricity can actually shave up to 30% of the peaks of the electricity consumption. What does that mean? It means that the whole production capacity, it means that the whole network, the whole grid does not necessarily have to be built to support all the peak situations. But if we can instead introduce flexibility, it's much cheaper, it's much better, and definitely much less carbon intensive if we are ensuring that people are actually able to use the electricity at the right time of the day. Basically, that not everybody necessarily needs to use electricity at the exact point in time where everybody else is also using it. So what did we do in 2003? I was the marketing director in a utility in Denmark. It's the largest utility there, and it was decided that now we need to roll out smart meters. There was a lot of opposition to this, basically because people found it very intrusive. They also didn't see the benefit, and they were also very afraid of their privacy. What does this mean to me? And the thing is that when I entered this in the early 2000s, the perception of the customer, seen from an electricity company point of view, was actually there in the top. Everybody saw the customers as what we called imbalances in the grid. They were not really people. They were actually a little bit annoying because they caused this disturbance. And then this changed very slowly. And again, this story is to tell you about that it's also important for the people that are actually on the side where they want to introduce new technology to understand how do they see, how do they perceive the audience that they are talking to. So slowly, as I worked with the internal communication in the company, I was able to change at least a little bit away from just seeing people as imbalances in the grid. At least, okay, it's a metering point. It's actually even maybe a consumer. It's actually someone using it. And the more we talked, okay, actually, maybe it's actually a person. And you know what? It could actually even be someone that we could collaborate with. So it was almost full circle in relation to understanding from just being an annoyance, an imbalance in the grid, that all of a sudden customers were actually part of the solution. And that's where we are then introducing new ways of thinking, new ways of communicating. So what did we do? 4 months prior to introducing smart meters, beginning to roll them out, we made a campaign. And we tried to make the existing old, it's called a Ferraris meter, these old ones, Ferraris meters, interesting. It was a campaign where we asked people to start reading their meter reading and send them outside of the normal one time a year where you normally send, because we told them that your meter is actually a jackpot machine. It's a lottery machine, and every month we will have a lucky draw, and if your number comes out, you'll win here 50,000 Danish kroner, which is 5,000 euros, something like that. And all of a sudden we were changing the perception of people normally just seeing this meter as something really ugly and that had to be hidden. Into something, and once people started sending us all these numbers, then we had actually an opportunity to get back to them and create a benchmark opportunity even before we had the smart meters, because all of a sudden we had 10, 15 different readings from different customers, and we can start an interaction with them, telling them, oh, you know what, you're actually spending a little more electricity than your neighbor, you want to know more. And the good thing is, actually, in just 4 months' time, we will start rolling out smart meters. So the whole perception, the whole understanding of how can we work with people and the audience in relation to introduce new technology was changed basically via a very simple means. The idea behind it was basically a communication strategy that you need to involve, engage, and then evolve with people. So basically, once you have started this communication, if you have data available, and that's again the beauty of smart meters, if you have data available, you are actually able to start communicating with people with something that makes sense and which is very valuable to them. So after this, people were actually able to log into our surveys, having the interaction, see if they could win, if they had the lottery ticket win. And the results were quite stunning. So after a year, we did the first measure. And overall, and this is actually quite huge, 17% reduction over 1 year was actually the first finding. So people had actually an opportunity to save quite a lot of electricity just by knowing how much electricity am I consuming and that my neighbor maybe is consuming less. How is that possible? Can I know more? Also, we found it interesting to see that after a year, we had more than 50% of all customers, we're talking 500,000 customers here, signing up. So basically giving their consent to start communicating using the data, and just again doing the calculation here, it means approximately 100 million tons of CO2 per year. Quite a lot from very simple measures, having a small lottery basically. And the thing is that this has actually continued, so a lot of people are still engaged working with this. It has not gone back to the old numbers, and that is. And one last thing in relation to this, we had 0.05% of complaints of people do not wanting to have a smart meter. And compared to other countries where they have maybe 5-10% of people not wanting to have a smart meter, that was also really great. And the thing behind this was that we understood, and that's part of what I want to say here, that people are not necessarily very rational. You need to work with them in an understanding where there is both a personal, a social, and societal level, and you need to communicate on all these different levels at the same time, realizing that no, people are actually not necessarily only rational. We need to communicate on a lot of different levels too. So in summary, and this is my last slide, I do believe that what we can learn from the Nordic context is that we need to basically address our audience in many different ways on different levels, both from a legislative but also from a communication perspective. The technology and the customer engagement needs to go hand in hand. We need to understand what are the biases, what are the different problems, why do people not necessarily want new technology, where do they need to change, and how can we make it much more comfortable without them. And then, last but not least, I mean, it does work to try to think around the clock and trying to go into the solutions in a new way. Yeah, that was what I had. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Tlieskali ste Tomasovi Mikkelsenovi. Thank you for your speech. Norway could be a big inspiration for us.